So I want to kick off the conversation by asking you a question. Do you remember a time, it was a long time ago, when you were still unconscious? Where your consciousness of self was not there yet? No, of course you can't consciously remember. You weren't conscious. So the thought I want to introduce this evening is that you began before you were conscious of your beginning. Okay. And, in every child's development, there's a period in which consciousness emerges, in which they become more and more self-conscious. We were walking on the beach a month or so ago before we came here, and we suddenly walked into these, I think it was 2 or 3, maybe 2.5-year-old kiddies who were just running around naked in absolute bliss, enjoying the water and the sand and just, completely unashamed of their nakedness, completely unaware of themselves, in a sense, just being one with the beauty of what surrounded them. No boundaries. Just spontaneous shouts of joy, and then the shout of joy can turn into crying in a moment like that if something bumps them off their feet. But as we saw this, we suddenly saw a whole group of adults just kind of stopped and watched this event of shameless, blameless innocence, enjoying the reality of that moment. And it's almost like there was this nostalgic memory of something that we recognize. And for myself, what I recognized is that I remembered immediately our kids. I remembered when they were 3-year-old kids. And kind of in a way desired, I wish they would just stay that age. How quickly we forget, because all the parents of 3-year-olds don't have that wish, do they? You just wish, would you please grow up? Would you please take care of your own diapers and all of those kind of things. But there's something that we recognize in that period of unconscious, blissful innocence. That period before a consciousness of self begins to develop. Now, what I want to emphasize there is that there's a part of you that, and I'm not going to go into all the psychology of it, but there's many books written, and the Bible has got a lot to say about the part of you that is not conscious. Now, the Bible uses different terms. They don't use our modern psychological terms, but the Bible is full of dreams, full of visions, things that happens beyond conscious control. Now, when every night, in a sense, we enter back into that dimension in which we lose consciousness, in which we lose control. Now, when consciousness begins to develop, that is a traumatic process. Because when you are not conscious, and child psychologists will tell you this, that there's these stages of development, but there's a stage in which the unconscious child makes no distinction between self and the other, because there is no self. What happens out there happens to me. What happens to me happens out there. There's no distinction between self and the other. Everything is one. Everything is connected. I am part of everything. Everything is part of me. And for consciousness to begin to develop out of that stage of blissful union is quite a battle. Because self-consciousness, in a sense, is a tear. It's this traumatic realization that there's a part of me that is not connected to everything, that I am distinct from everything that happens around me. And that process of becoming conscious is a battle. The consciousness needs to establish itself and needs to fight the unconscious. And the battle begins in order for the self-consciousness to develop that brings a division between the conscious and the unconscious. And that division is something that needs to be healed later in life. It's a necessary stage of development. To become conscious is not evil. It's not bad. It's a necessary state. But because it's such a traumatic experience, we almost completely suppress the unconscious in order to give room for, we suppress the unconscious in order to give room for the consciousness. Now, subconscious or unconscious, let's just tonight, it's the same thing, okay? It's the opposite of being in conscious control, is that part of us that is unconscious. Now, the unconscious continues to have a huge influence on you, but you're not conscious of it. Let me give you a simple example. I don't know if I gave this example the last time, but if I did, hey, you'll be reminded. I remember as a young kid, I must have been 4 or 5, it's before I started going to school. We lived in a community complex that had a communal pool. And my brothers were older than me, so they were always allowed to go in the big pool. And I had to stay in the splash pool, which was very irritating, because you always want to do what the older kids are doing. One day, they left for school. My mom was distracted, and I headed out to the pool. And I just jumped in, because I was told I'm not allowed to. And I was going to show them that I can. And it's amazing how vivid that memory is, because I was 4 or 5. And I remember jumping in, I hit the bottom, I kicked myself up, took a big breath, and I started sinking again. But this time I sank down much slower because I didn't jump in. I was just kind of sinking. And that's where the kind of panic kicked in. I think I better kick harder because the bottom's not coming. And my toes just reached, and I kicked up again, got a bit of a breath, and I still saw the stairs and was wondering, how can I make it to the stairs? And at that stage, a teenager that lived in the same complex thankfully saw me heading for the pool. He jumped in, pulled me out. Now, I forgot about that for many years, for many decades. And about 2 years ago, Marianne and myself, we found a home base after traveling constantly. And one of the routines that we got into, I used to hate routine, but if you've got no routine for 7 years, you love it when you get back a little bit of routine. And one of the things we did on a weekly basis is we'd go to our marine pool. We live near the coast. And we just have a swim there. And one day I told her, as I was swimming, I tried to breathe out my nose while swimming, and I couldn't get the breath out my nose. And I came up, and my nose was clear. I said, surely I know that if you swim, you're supposed to breathe out through your nose and then come up for a breath. And I asked Marianne, can you breathe out your nose when you're under the water? Yeah, you go under, breathe out. And I was just thinking, what's the problem? And suddenly, as I gave it my attention, that memory came back. You see, many times an experience or an event that you have not processed consciously, it's still there in the subconscious, and it comes out. If it doesn't come out in a conscious engagement with it, it comes out in an unconscious manifestation, sometimes in your body. And that is what happened to me. I couldn't breathe out physically because my whole body was trying to hold onto every breath there is when I'm underwater. Because I don't know when I'm getting my next breath. And so as me and Marianne chatted about it, I kind of just relaxed, spoke to myself, say, hey, you're not going to drown, you know how to swim. Just get under the water and breathe out, be at peace. I processed that memory consciously. I got under the water, sat there for a while, breathed out, and came up when I wanted. And since then, swimming's fine. But that's just a simple example to show that the things that we have not processed, messages that we have not interpreted, events that we don't know how to deal with, that is part of the unconscious. It goes and it lies there, and consciously we might forget. Consciously we might say we don't want to think about it, but that does not get rid of it. Now, I see a lot of worried faces. That's not just bad news, that's good news as well. Sometimes we're afraid of the subject of the unconscious because we don't know what crap is lurking in there. I always use the excuse that I don't know what's a bad word in the US. I'm from a different culture, whatever. Okay, so, but we're kind of scared of that subject because we wonder, are we going to open a can of worms? Well, whether you open it or not, it's there. And opening it brings healing. Opening it brings release. And that's part of the unconscious, is memories, messages that we have not interpreted. But there's another beautiful part of the unconscious, a tremendously beautiful part. I remember when our kids were young, you would remember everyone who had kids when they first start drawing. And they first do a drawing of mom and dad or their sibling. I remember Eugene had a picture of just like little stick figures of two figures holding hands, and the larger figure was his sister. And no amount of artistic education could help him give a more honest or beautiful representation of the connection that he felt to his sister than that very simple initial drawing. And maybe it's because much of that drawing still came out of feeling, out of unconscious stream and flow, rather than this conscious control of, did I get the proportion of the hand to the arm just right? Did I get the perspective just right? That was completely absent. You see, the unconscious works in symbols rather than words. Words are more restrictive, where symbols are more open for interpretation, more inclusive. And And in a way, the early stories that humans told themselves, our early mythology, our early origin stories, even the stories we find in Genesis, where animals can still speak, where trees has magical qualities. Those kind of stories are like humanity in their infancy, drawing a picture that might not fit into our very educated, conscious control, but they have a wisdom and the honesty and the beauty about them that still flows directly from the unconscious that we should not ignore. Does that make sense? Can you see the beauty of the symbolism of the early stories? And many of those early stories speaks about a battle. It's almost like this battle that takes place for the conscious to break free from the unconscious. In fact, many of the anthropologists who went and did studies in very remote areas, in primitive communities who are still emerging into consciousness, would tell stories about sleep being very important. And even if I have to give their attention to something specifically for a long time, it wears them out so quickly they need to go sleep for a few hours afterwards. So it's interesting what they found. Just like you developed as a child from an unconscious state into a conscious state, humanity as a whole developed from an unconscious state into a conscious state. It's part of God's amazing creative ability to allow us to participate in this process of creation. To not just do it all in the beginning and just say, now get on with it, but rather to call humanity out of an initial state, just put possibilities in front of him and say, you can help me create what you become. And it seems like all of creation has a trajectory towards greater consciousness, where God is calling us into a place where we become more and more aware of the beauty that we are part of. Now, part of the wonder of the unconscious, and this is in a sense part of the memory of all of these stories, is they remember a state of union. They remember a state of perfection. They remember a state in which everything's whole. And the symbols that are used are often circles. You know, a circle is the same above and beneath. There's no distinction between left and right. It encompasses everything. There's no beginning nor end. Time works differently. Even if you have dreams, I don't know if you ever had a dream where you woke up with a noise, but in your dream you constructed a long story to get to that noise that wakes you up. Isn't that amazing? What actually happened is you heard a noise and your mind is incredible. It creates in a moment a story that could have spanned weeks or days to make sense of that sound that wakes you up. You see, the unconscious, time works differently. Sequence works differently. And there's a wisdom there. This is where many of the stories speaks about a fight with a dragon, or a fight with the birth parents, or a fight with the monster mother. It's all part of this sense of self that wants to establish itself. It begins as a fight against my own unconsciousness. Later on, it turns into a fight against those who give me my identity, my parents. I want to become separate. I want to become my own self. It begins as this fight against everything that tries to confine me in order to establish my own identity. So that's a natural process. But later on in life, there is room for us to once again return to the bliss and the awareness that is only accessible in the unconscious. You are not just what you are aware of. You are more than what you are conscious of. You consist both of a conscious and the unconscious part. Now this is where it becomes very exciting. The conscious part of you is the part that has a story and the framework of reference with which it wants to understand everything. Isn't that true? Everything that happens to you, everything you experience, the conscious part of you tries to fit it into that story. And if it doesn't fit into the story, we ignore it, or we try to ignore it, or we throw that uninterpreted message back into the unconscious because it doesn't fit into the story. The unconscious part of you, this you will also be aware of because of your dreams. It's not that bound to logic. You know, in the unconscious you can take off and fly. In the unconscious you can suddenly be present with people that are no longer present in this conscious world. In the unconscious, time disappears. In the unconscious, your dad is young again. In the unconscious, it's all part of one big whole story. And the sequence doesn't have to follow the logic of the conscious part. Now, there's a beautiful scripture in Genesis. You remember the story of Jacob. You know, Jacob is the person who has an identity crisis. Who am I? Am I Jacob or am I Esau? And his mom, together with him, conspires to deceive his father so that he can get the blessing of Esau. And he goes into the tent to receive this blessing. And 3 times his father asks, "Who are you?" And that question haunts him for the rest of his life. Because he has to lie and he says, "I'm Esau." And when they have a bit of a conversation and something's not quite right with the dad, so he asks again, "Who are you?" "I'm Esau." So he's got to establish this false identity, and then he falls in love with Rachel, you know, and he works 7 years for her, but he's given Leah, who is the firstborn daughter, who in the culture needs to be married to the firstborn son. So again, he in a way receives the wife that belongs to the firstborn. Again, who am I? Am I Esau or am I Jacob? And in this pursuit of identity, he comes to Bethel. Before it was called Bethel, he falls asleep in this spot. And he enters the world of the unconscious. And in this world of the unconscious, heaven and earth is connected. There's messengers that flows. There's a connection that is not present within the conscious world. And he wakes up, you know, he has a rest, he has this dream, he has this rest. So he wakes up, and our translation, our normal translation says, his words is, "God is in this place and I did not know it." The Zohar, which is ancient Jewish translation and commentary on the Old Testament, they translate it this way. God is in this I did not know. Ha 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 ha. There's a God is in this I did not know. There's a part of you that you do not know. And God is there. You don't have to fear that part of you that you do not know. You see, in that part of you where messages are still uninterpreted, any meaning is possible. You can't just receive any meaning into your conscious story. But in the unconscious, where everything is still unstructured, where everything doesn't conform to your logic and your story, where everything has not been interpreted yet, any interpretation is possible. You see, in silence, every sound is possible. But when the music is playing already, every sound is no longer possible because it's already been realized. This is the song. You see, your unconscious, in a sense, is Genesis 1 verse 2. It's a wasteland that is chaotic and unformed. But it's exactly there where the Spirit of Yahweh, of Elohim, comes to hover and says, I do my best work where there's chaos. It is where there's no meaning that I can create the most beautiful meaning. It's where there's chaos that I can create an order that has never been before. See, we're so used to associate chaos with evil. There's nothing in Genesis that suggests that chaos is evil. In fact, if that scripture suggests anything, it's this, that chaos is the raw material from which God creates. Woo! You know, how relevant does this make Genesis to your story? That God begins his creative process not when you've got it all sorted out. God does his best work not when you've been perfectly ordered and disciplined, but rather God's just looking to hover over the confusion, over the ignorance, over the chaos, to begin whispering a desire, to begin calling forth meaning and saying, I want you to evolve in pursuit of the beauty that I hold in front of you, in pursuit of the possibilities that I place in front of you. I want you to co-create with me the meaning of your life. New meaning, new possibilities, new opportunities do not always come from your conscious story. But rather, it's once we've matured to the place where we now realize, okay, I've established a story. I've established an identity. But that's exactly it. There's that conscious part of our story where we are in control, where we know how it works, where we know what to expect, where we can predict our future, but there's a stage in your life where you've got to come to that place where you say, okay, I acknowledge that part of me, but I now acknowledge that's not all of me. There's an I do not know. Woo! And God is there, inviting you to create new meaning, new identity, new being, new order, new creation. This is why Jesus says, hey, if you want to find life, lose that life that you are so familiar with. In other words, just for a moment, lose control. Lose consciousness. Woo! And discover that there's a part of me that is not distinct or separate from God. But there's a part of me that is completely intertwined with God in such a way that I don't know where He begins and I end, or where I begin or where He ends. That I'm part of a whole. I remember just before we came, it was actually during the time where we were praying, Lord, should we go? It's so nice to hear from the Lord, you know. Sometimes we try to just organize things by email, but it's very nice to just hear. When we began, we didn't even have internet when we began traveling. And I remember one morning I woke up and prayed, Lord, where should we go? And I just felt the Lord said, Swaziland. And so it's a neighboring country. No, that was Swaziland, the other one. And I told Marianne, we're going to Swaziland. And she said, okay, for how long should I pack? I don't know. That's all I got, Swaziland. So let's pack. We packed, and as we drove out, a friend stopped us who lived in the community and said, where are you going? And she said, I was at because we were all part of a ministry, I was at a missionaries conference last week, and I met a man, Joseph, some name, I can't remember what the name is. Let's say Joseph Peterson, whatever, just give him a name. And he's from Swaziland. Well, okay, it's a country. It's like we're saying we're from South Africa, and somebody say, "Oh, we know a guy called Peter. Do you know him?" No. There's 60 million people just in South Africa. So we took, okay, great, and we drove into Swaziland. We got to the first town. Can you remember the name? In any case, we got to the first town and we stopped at the little cafe and had a Coke. And the waiter that came and took our order, I just felt to ask her, do you know Joseph Peterson? And she said, yes, he lives upstairs. I'll go call him for you. She went and fetched him. And he was so excited. I've been praying that God sends me somebody to help me with, they were doing a conference and we could help him there for the week. So, in any case, back to about a month ago, 2 months ago, we had to decide, do we want to do this trip or not? And the one night I woke up and I didn't know where I was, whether I dreamt or whether it was real. And as I tried to work it out, I realized that whether I dreamt or not, the experience was real, because I could still feel it happening. And what I experienced is just the sense in which I dissolved. I could watch myself disappear and dissolve into an awareness a largeness, and I'm struggling to find words for things that doesn't fit into our conscious constructs. But it was so big that I could experience the whole universe was just a heartbeat within this reality. Our 14 billion years of this universe was just like in this consciousness. And then, I came back. And that's not to say that our ultimate destiny is to just dissolve and disappear, but it's to make us aware of the fact that, yes, there's a part of you that is distinct. That's your identity. That's not evil. But there's a part of you that is not distinct, that is part of God in a way that your conscious self is not. Does that make sense? I'm trying to find words for that. And part of the gospel is God coming to broaden our story. You see, losing yourself, the way in which I was taught it for a long time. I'm going on too long. Is that? But we're going to do the questions now. I'm excited about this. Awesome.
Yeah, we didn't talk about this, did we?
No, we didn't. No, we didn't. So, the way in which I was taught about self needs to die was basically what you are and who you are is so evil and bad, you must just kill it. Now, if you've grown up in that kind of religious system, if you desired it, it was probably sin. And if you liked it, it was definitely of the devil. That was the kind of religion I grew up in. If you absolutely suffer and hate what you're doing, you're in the center of God's will. So we obviously rebelled against that kind of interpretation because Jesus didn't embody this sour, suffering person. He embodied joy. I mean, wherever he went, people got rid of their suffering. The sick were healed. The people who couldn't pay their taxes miraculously caught a fish and they could pay their taxes. I mean, he went and he brought joy and restoration in whoever he touched. And so we realize that we need to interpret that scripture differently. So to lose yourself is not motivated by you are deprived, you evil, let's kill you so that I can create something else. But rather, when you understand that your sense of self only embodies a very small portion of what you are, to lose yourself means I'm getting rid of a few of those borders so that I can be expanded, so that more of the beauty and the meaning of the unconscious can become part of my conscious awareness. And so it is a process of continually dying and being resurrected into a larger consciousness, into a larger awareness than what you had before. And in that sense, it's not even a case of there's a true self and a false self. Okay? Because I know in the terminology we use, we often speak of true self and false self, and we kind of think that the conscious self is false and the subconscious maybe is true. Those definitions just doesn't do it. Let's just say that there's a part of you that partakes of the infinity of God. And there's a part of you that can only embody a part of it at this stage. You can only be aware of so much. And this process of dying so that I may live is simply a process of losing the boundaries that defines me so that God can redefine me in a larger, bigger, amazing way. And both those parts remain part of the mystery of what makes you, you. See, part of where we find our identity is we find it in the way in which we distinguish ourselves from others. I am who I am because I am not Mike. I am who I am because I'm not Mary Ann. I am who I am because I'm not the chair. We define ourselves by negation. And I am not this, I'm not that. That is what makes me me. Now, was it the Franciscan priest? It was, what is that Charles Finney, the guy that he spoke about? The wisdom of Meister Eckhart. Meister Eckhart, who lived hundreds of years ago. He said something so powerful and beautiful. I had to hear it 20 times before I got it. But tonight, the spirit of revelation and wisdom is here for you to just get it. So Meister Eckhart said this: God doesn't define himself by negation. That's the way we define ourselves. God negates our negation. In other words, God says, I am not you. I'm not you. In other words, God sees himself in each one of you. God sees himself being realized, being given existence in your existence. God finds existence in your existence. And so this beautiful process of unveiling the unconscious, of revealing to you that there's a part of you you do not know, and I'm there. And yes, maybe it means that we've got to deal with a bit of the, nonsense that we haven't dealt with. Things like almost drowning. Okay, deal with that memory now. Give that over to me. Have peace. Face it. Enjoy it. Maybe there's some stuff in your past that's there, but it's a good thing to start verbalizing it. In fact, some psychologists define trauma as the unspoken. It's the stuff that I cannot verbalize that festers. And so that process of starting to speak, starting to communicate, starting to be vulnerable, that's part of a healing process. But there's much more in your unconscious than just suppressed memories. God is in this I did not know. There is beauty, meaning, value there. There's stuff there that has never been seen on this planet. There's beauty there that has never been manifested in this universe. And God sees in you an opportunity to make known a facet of his beauty that has never been before. Wow. Man, waiting to be revealed. Waiting to be created. You see, there's two aspects of it. There's the aspect of things need to be uncovered. That's kind of revealing. It's there already and it's revealed. That's one aspect of it. But I think there's a very important other aspect that we don't often speak of, and that is there's stuff that's not been created yet. And you are invited to co-create that beauty. It's not just being revealed, it's being created. Okay. Awesome. Absolutely. So there's revelation is necessary for that creative process to happen. Yes, yes. And so God is that possibility that hovers over the chaos of what is unformed, uninterpreted. There's a beautiful psalm. I think it's Psalm 49 or 149. It's where David says, I will solve the riddle. I will solve my riddle with the music of the harp. You can interpret it in this way, that he says, I will solve the riddle of me. I will unfold the riddle of me with this music. Now, music is this beautiful metaphor of the language of the unconscious. The reason all of us can relate to music, to some music, is because it's a language that is unformed. We hear the music and we somehow sense a meaning, but we don't know exactly what the meaning is, because the music is not that defined as words. It's an invitation for you to create the meaning. That's why we all relate to certain types of music, because in hearing that music, we've experienced that creative call that says, you create the meaning. You create the beauty of this moment, of this sound. And as we participate in that creative process, that's why we love music. It's not something we just observe. It's something that we become part of, something where we create its beauty. And so David speaks about unfolding the riddle of me as music creates an atmosphere where much meaning is possible. But it's not simply contained in the music itself. It's contained in the combination of a creative agent that combines with hearing this sound and creating that meaning. Glory. I think I've said enough tonight. Yeah, yes.